Buddhist Absorption by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim-Chu Patapa. An absorption is a special condition when starting to focus in meditation on something the mind will become concentrated and calm, and if we can sustain this condition for a period of times, then the mind will be absorbed into an inner mind, and reaching the state of absorption. In performing the mantra meditation or absorptive meditation, the mind will rush into the absorption without abandoning any unwholesome thought, while in the Buddhist meditation, as unwholesome thoughts are abandoned, the mindfulness will be developed to be more powerful until when all the five hindrance or the lower fetter are cleansed along the course of thought, then the mind will become more and more steadied internally, composed, unified, concentrated, and then the mind will reach into an absorption with mindfulness. The Buddha explained this process of mindfulness meditation as cleaning the mind along the course of thought, and once all the five hindrances are completely abandoned, then the mind will be much steadied and automatically reaching into an inner mind of initial thought of the origin of the five lower fetters. Putting in simple terms, by continuing performing a mindfulness meditation with effort, when it is sufficient enough as all the five hindrances along the courses of thoughts are completely abandoned, then the mind will reach an absorption. The Venerable Sariputta explained the Buddhist practice in an absorption with mindfulness as follows.
The first jhana, the first absorption level, consists of initial thought, liberated thinking, rapture, relaxation, and one-pointedness. After being able to abandon all the five hindrances, the five lower fetters, namely, desire for sensual pleasure, hatred, depression, anxiety, and doubt in Dharma, then the mind will enter into the first jhana, including the conditions of initial thought, liberated thinking, rapture, relaxation, and one-pointedness.
As the matter of fact, all the five hindrances, lower fetters, are kind of internal unwholesome thinking. They are originated after the mind processes in the volitional formations of the first round of the process of dependent origination. These lower fetters will disturb the mind, making the mind to struggle with all kinds of matters in the world. Technically, the difference between a meditation and an absorption is that we are in the meditation as long as we are abandoning any arising unwholesome thinking along the course of thought, but once we are entering into an inner mind of an initial thought, then we are in an absorption. Typically, in performing a mindfulness meditation we will encounter with various kinds of the five lower fetters, and once we are able to abandon all the five lower fetters, then we will enter an inner mind of an initial thought of the origin of the five lower fetters in the first jhana. And by having a mindfulness with liberated thinking to abandon the initial thought. And this is the reason why all the five lower fetters have to be abandoned before entering into the absorption, so that the mind will learn on how to liberate any arising initial thought in the absorption. After then the mind will develop into the second jhana, the third jhana, and the fourth jhana, respectively. Then the mind will be concentrated into a special one-pointedness state of mind. And at this development, the Buddha called this special condition as a master of the course of thought. The Venerable Ananda explained about the progress in the mindfulness absorption development as follows.
The absorption with mindfulness in the Buddhist practice consists of 4 stages as follows. The first jhana, the first absorption level. The mind typically consists of 5 states including initial thought, liberated thinking, rapture, relaxation, and concentration. However, the mind is mostly struggling with initial thought and liberated thinking, and occasionally also in rapture, in relaxation, and one-pointedness. The second jhana. Typically, after being able to abandon initial thoughts with liberated thinking, the mind will be in rapture, and then enjoying in relaxation. The third jhana. After the cessation of rapture, the mind will be in mentally relaxation. He is mindful, one who dwells happily. The fourth jhana. After the cessation of being relaxed, then the mind is in a state of tranquility, with one-pointedness, and at this time by keeping the mindfulness not to bias on any arising object of consciousness, and then the mind will develop into a purified mindfulness. The mind is in neutral, and being unbiased to any mental phenomenon, which is ready for performing the four mindfulness foundations.
It should be highlighted here that the Buddhist absorption is different from the traditional absorption that forces the mind into an absorption with the power of meditation, but in the Buddhist absorption, we need to have a mindfulness in performing the absorption into the initial thought. In addition, most people are used to the meaning of the word rapture as being excitedly happiness, but in Buddhism the rapture in the absorption means a rapture in peace as follows. At one time, the Buddha addressed that people should not be only limited to giving a charity to monks, but they should attain the rapture in peace as well. Then the Venerable Sariputta explained the meaning of rapture in peace as follows.
When the rapture in peace is attained, there will be no such inside condition of those including having a happy feeling in accordance with sensual pleasure, having an unhappy feeling in accordance with sensual pleasure, having a happy feeling in accordance with any unwholesomeness, having an unhappy feeling in accordance with any unwholesomeness, having an unhappy feeling in accordance with any wholesomeness. That is, the mind will be in rapture with wholesomeness and internally steady, composed, and united in peace.
The Buddha admired and confirmed on the Venerable Sariputta's wording, and then restating the above wording. It is very clear that there are many types of raptures, and the kind of Buddhist rapture in the Buddhist absorption is specifically a rapture arises after liberating unwholesome initial thoughts by proper wholesome thoughts, then the mind becomes internally steady, composed, and united with rapture in peace, and not to be confused with other general raptures of sensual pleasure or unwholesomeness. Even in case of wholesomeness with unhappy feeling, especially there is definitely no supernatural or magical powers involved in the Buddhist practice. The subject of rapture is mentioned here is to distinguish the difference between the conventional Brahman's absorption and the Buddhist absorption, because the rapture in Brahman's absorption is mistaken to be assumed as a sort of supernatural power, while the Buddhist absorption is for mindfulness development in purified mindfulness for performing an insight observation. The success of performing the Buddhist absorption was described by the Buddha to the Venerable Ananda as follows.
And what is the path and way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters? Here, with seclusion from acquisitions, with the abandoning of unwholesome states, with the complete tranquilizing of bodily inertia, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. Whatever exists therein of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. He sees those states as impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, as a tumor, as a barb, as a calamity, as an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as empty, as no self. He turns his mind away from those states and directs it toward the deathless element thus. This is the peaceful, this is the sublime, that is, the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. If he is steady in that, he attains the destruction of the taints. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, then through that very desire for the Dharma, that delight in the Dharma, with the destruction of the 5 lower fetters he becomes one due to be reborn spontaneously, in the pure abodes, and there attain final nibbana without ever returning from that world. This is the path and way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. Again, with the subsiding of thought and examination, a monk enters and dwells in the second jhana. Again, with the fading away as well of rapture, a monk enters and dwells in the third jhana. He is mindful, one who dwells happily. Again, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, a monk enters and dwells in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. Whatever exists therein of form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, he sees those states as impermanent, as no self. He turns his mind away from those states and directs it toward the deathless element. This is the path and the way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. The 5 hindrances, the 5 lower fetters, are completely eliminated. Again, with the complete transcending of perceptions of forms, with the passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, aware that space is infinite, a monk enters upon and dwells in the 5th jhana, which is in the base of the infinity of space. Whatever exists therein of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, he sees those states as impermanent, as no self. He turns his mind away from those states and directs it toward the deathless element. This is the path and the way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. The 5 hindrances, the 5 lower fetters, are completely eliminated again. Again, by completely transcending the base of the infinity of space, aware that consciousness is infinite, a monk enters upon and dwells in the 6th jhana, which is in the base of the infinity of consciousness. Whatever exists therein of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, he sees those states as impermanent, as no self. He turns his mind away from those states and directs it toward the deathless element. This is the path and the way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. The 5 hindrances, the 5 lower fetters, are completely eliminated again. Again, by completely transcending the base of the infinity of consciousness, aware that there is nothing, a monk enters upon and dwells in the base of nothingness. Whatever exists therein of feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, he sees those states as impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, as a tumor, as a barb, as a calamity, as an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as void, as no self. He turns his mind away from those states and directs it toward the deathless element.
In Mamlukya Sutta, the Venerable Ananda explained that even during being in the 1st jhana after an initial thought was replaced by liberated thinking, in order to attain a nibbana. Also, an absorption could be performed in many stages as up to the 6th jhana. However, later the Buddha suggested to perform up to the 4th jhana for purified mindfulness development, and then switching to perform an insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations instead. As a result, the typical Buddhist practice will perform up to the 4th jhana, as to skip the 5th jhana and the 6th jhana by performing an insight observation. In the system of Buddhist practice, we will perform up the 4th jhana, the mind will not bias on any receiving object of consciousness, as the mind reaches a special state of tranquility by applying a purified mindfulness, as the Buddha explained as follows.
The mind can be developed into a purified mindfulness by having the mind will not to be biased by any objects of consciousness, no matter it is an external object of consciousness or an internal object of consciousness. The mind is stable not to be bother with the world, and not to stay within any thought. This is a purified mindfulness for performing an insight observation in the 4 mindfulness foundations.
And since the notion of purified mindfulness was first introduced in Buddhism, later the Mahakaccana elaborated the meaning of having a steadied mindfulness as follows.
During the mind encounters the world, a stimulus from the world enters into the mind through the 6 sense bases. The mind will have a consciousness fetching the stimulus as an object of consciousness called an external object of consciousness. This external object of consciousness will arise and fade away within a short period. However, as long as the mind still clings on the matter of the object of consciousness, the mind will proceed on the volitional formations and generating a new mental phenomenon so-called an internal object of consciousness. We can see that as the mind is having a consciousness, the mind is interfacing with an object of consciousness at all time, and it can be either an external or an internal object of consciousness. During performing an absorption till the 4th jhana, by having a mindfulness to stay firm at one-pointedness state of mind, not to be bothered by any unwholesome matter, and holding the mind not to be in favor or non-favor to any particular mental phenomenon, and by then the mindfulness will be developed to be a purified mindfulness, which will be used in an insight observation.
In the Buddhist practice of samatha vipassana, the part of samatha will finish here when the mind attains the state of purified mindfulness, which is the most critical component to be used in seeing the Dharma in an insight observation. The mind is firmly internally steady, composed, united, and concentrated with purified mindfulness. And it is considered as the start of the part of vipassana. At this moment, all defilements of middle and strong types will be completely cleansed off the mind, and the mind will be in a state sort of equanimity with purified mindfulness, that is, being neither pleasurable nor unpleasurable to any arising mental phenomenon. Then the mind is borderless. This is a special quality of mind that can be used in performing an insight observation in the four mindfulness foundations.